and welcome to Planet Poetry. My name's Robin Houghton.
And I'm Peter Kenny. In this episode, we'll take you into the Black Country when Robin talks to Liz Berry about her new collection, The Home Child.
And Peter and I have a chat about the National Poetry Competition because we were up in London for the prize-giving night, weren't we, Peter?
We certainly were.
Plus, we have another attempt to get to the bottom of negative capability, helped along by a wonderful essay by Katie Evans Bush.
But before all that, let's hear Robin's interview with Liz Berry.
Liz Berry is an award-winning poet and the author of 4 collections, most recently The Home Child, a novel in verse. Her poems, rooted in the landscape and language of her native Black Country, have received the Somerset Maugham Award, Geoffrey Faber Memorial Prize and Forward Prizes. So Liz Berry, welcome to Planet Poetry. Lovely to have you on here.
Thank you, Robin. It's lovely to be here.
We're going to be talking about your brand new collection, The Home Child, but also Black Country, which was your first full collection, which I've always loved. So this is a great chance to get you to talk about that as well. First of all, we like to ask people, where are they? Where are you on the planet?
Oh, so I'm calling in today from my house in Birmingham.
Ah, Birmingham. Is Birmingham in the Black Country?
Ah, that's such a good question, Robin. So the brilliant and sort of fascinating thing about the Black Country is it's a region with no officially defined borders, but it exists somewhere just north of Birmingham, where I live now. And that's what makes it a really infinitely fascinating area. It's sort of a shape-shifting region.
Ah, interesting. Yes, because that was my first question, because obviously your collection's called Black Country, and I had to look it up. And even when I looked it up, like you say, I wasn't quite sure because there are various definitions of it. And it's called the Black Country because of its industrial past, or?
Yeah, so the Black Country was a really heavily industrialised region, the sort of birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. And there's lots of stories about how it got its name, the Black Country. But my favourite is that Queen Victoria was going on a train tour of the country to visit all her regions. And when she got to the area where the Black Country is, she's said to have called aloud, "Draw the curtains on this terrible Black Country."
No.
Which I love, and I really hope it's true. But as a name, it sounds wonderfully mythic, doesn't it? The Black Country. This
Absolutely.
Sort of wonderful hinterland or underworld, which feels a real gift as a writer.
I suppose, yes, I can see that. And you do use black in so many ways, and it's so evocative. So perhaps we should start with a poem called Black Country from your first collection.
Black Country. Commuters saw it first. Vast. On the hillside by the A41. A wingless Pegasus. Hooves kicking road into the distance. It had appeared overnight. A black shadow on the scrub, galloping above the gates of the derelict factories. Facing east, towards the pits. Mouth parted, as if it'd swallow the sun that rose from behind the winding gear. Word spread. Crowds gathered. Kids, someone said. But when they examined its flanks, they found pure coal. Coal where none had been mined in years. Where houses still collapsed into empty shafts, and hills bore scars. A gift from the underworld, hauling the past from the dead earth. Old men knelt to breathe the smoke of its mane, whisper in its ear, walked away in silence, fists clenched, faces streaked with tears.
It's a beautiful poem. And this horse, I mean, you know, we're used to seeing white horses on English hillsides, But the idea of the subverting that into the black horse appearing, you've got a lot of those themes in this poem straight away, and the old men and the smoke and the tears and the dereliction. So it's a really nice poem to start with, I think. Brings us to quite a lot of your themes. And although you said about the Black Country steeped in the Industrial Revolution and coal mining, you've got a very strong connection to the natural world, haven't you? I mean, animals and creatures and flora come up a lot in your work.
Yeah, I think what's really fascinating about the Black Country and Birmingham, like lots of former industrial regions, is that great swathes of them have been left derelict and so become unintentionally rewilded. Canals that used to be the equivalent of motorways or train tracks are now grown with wildflowers and bindweed, buddleia. Buildings that have been left derelict, old factories have got trees growing inside. So I think all around us, we've got this wonderful push and pull between the man-made and the urban, and also the natural. And there's something quite subversive about the natural in the Black Country as it's creeping over the remains of what people have made and abandoned.
Yeah, no, I can imagine that. This strong connection that I sense between you and the animal life. Sometimes humans and animals are interchangeable in your poems. I wanted to also say about the black horse that prefigures another black horse, which is significant in your new collection, doesn't it? So it's a nice kind of theme that comes through. And talking about animals and birds, I wondered if you might read the poem The Year We Married Birds, because that's another one. I think I read it in, at the time, perhaps it was in, I don't know, the Rialto or somewhere.
The Year We Married Birds. That year, with men turning 30 still refusing to fly the nest, we married birds instead. Migrating snow bunting swept into offices in the city, took flocks of girls for Highland weddings. Magpies smashed jewellers' windows, kites hovered above bridal shops. A pigeon in Trafalgar Square learnt to kneel. Sales of nesting boxes soared. Soon cinemas were wild as woods in May, while restaurants served worms. By June, a Russian kittiwake wed the minister's daughter, gave her 2 freckled eggs, a mansion on a cliff. My own groom was a kingfisher, enigmatic, bright. He gleamed in a metallic turquoise suit, taught me about fishing in the murky canal. We honeymooned near the Wash. The salt marshes booming with courting bittern. When I think of that year, I remember best the fanning of his feathers on my cheek, his white throat, how every building, every street rang with birdsong, how girls' wedding dresses lifted them into the trees like wings.
That's a terrific ending, that last line, the idea of the girls' dresses lifting them into the trees with wings. It's just so powerful and beautiful. And the poem seems to kind of just take flight at the end there. I love that. So you mentioned the murky canal in that, and the canal comes up a lot, doesn't it? Or I think it's cut is the term, isn't it? Is that the local word?
Yeah, the beautiful Black Country word for canal is cut. It sounds so great, like to the point, and incredibly dangerous and sinister. And I think the canal's got both those elements. We've got a canal boat. We've had it since I was a little girl.
Oh, really?
So I spent a good long time on the cuts of the Midlands, and some of them are bucolic and idyllic and picturesque, and some are dark and gritty, and you'd sail on through quick.
Well, and indeed, the next time I'm going to ask you to read is to do with that kind of the darky, murky depths of one of the cuts. You produced it as a film poem, I think. Was it with the Poetry Society or? Yeah, and I remember watching this, and I think I had not heard you read before at that point, I think. I remember watching this film poem, The filming is strong and it's kind of ambiguous and weird and frightening and dark. And then your poem and your voice and these dialect words, I didn't understand every word, but it didn't matter because I got the gist of it and it was really frightening. So I wondered if you might recreate that moment for me.
I will, of course.
the Black Delf Bride.
I will. So this poem, The Black Delf Bride, is one of a pair of poems. The other one's called Gosty Hill, that I think of as sort of canal murder ballads. One thing I love to do in my work is create myths and stories about the Black Country, because it's quite an unknown region. As a writer, you get the privilege of creating myths around it. The Black Delf Bride. I was the cut, lovered atween the groaning locks, a nail on the anvil waiting to be punched. A wench, unbuckling the collar of a bear and dancing into his paws to waltz. Down a Black Delf, I was. Black Delf, my girl she floats, her bridesmaids, eels and voles and stoats. Snuff your lantern, hear her sing. I was the tune foxes yelped in the nettled banks, a bonnet torn off and trampled in the danks. A minnow, hooked tight and roiling in his grasp. Down at Black Delf I was. Black Delf, my girl, she sinks. Her wedding gown, fishing net weeds and mink. Jeddin your engines, hear her sing. I was a wet the bed laid on the tongue, a sorrow in winter, a muckled thorn, a coiled rope waiting to be hung. The black horse that stumbles like a dream from the fog, unbridled, unshod. Down at Black Delf, I was. Down at Black Delf, I was.
Oh, it's a spine-tingling piece. And I liked what you just said about the fact that you have the ability to create these myths or these stories, because reading that and some of the others, I just got the impression that these were old legends that you'd kind of revivified. But as you say, a poet can make things up.
That's something that I always like to talk about with other poets and with students. I say it's all right to make it up. It doesn't have to be true. It can be true to the heart of something or emotionally true without you having to say or use exactly what happened to you. And I think especially if you're writing about a region, it's no good just saying what's already been said or what people already know.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've got this chance to do something different, to make people see it in a new way. And I think that was something that was quite particular to Black Country and how it was embraced by readers, was that it showed a region everyone thought they knew about or didn't really know about or weren't that interested in. And it lifted it up and showed it in this dark and unexpected light.
Yeah. And also you make free use of local words, dialect words, vernacular, but in such a way that it's still, even if one doesn't know the exact words, and sometimes you'll have a little footnote, won't you? Or in the back of the home child, you've actually got a glossary, but quite often they're very easy to pick up, os for horse, it's not really that difficult. And it really, when you're reading it as a reader, you can almost hear yourself talking in that accent. And I rather like that. Is that something you've done deliberately from the start when you started writing? Have you always written using dialect words? Is that important to you?
It was a really conscious decision to begin using Black Country dialect in poems. I'd been writing for a little while and then my nan died. My nan had a really beautiful, thick, rich Black Country voice. And all of a sudden I started looking at the poems I was reading and writing and thinking, where are those beautiful voices of women like my nan and my mum? Why aren't their voices in poems? There was some gorgeous poetry using other vernaculars and dialect, Scots, for example, but nothing from the Black Country, nothing that I felt really touched on lyric poetry. There's lots of comic verse or sort of nostalgic verse, but nothing that held up the language, said, look, these voices are really beautiful and eloquent. Look at these words, like little treasures. I've described it before as like sort of digging up this lovely hoard out of the muck, sort of Staffordshire hoard.
How appropriate.
So appropriate.
Coal mining it. Yeah.
Sort of these beautiful words. And the first poem I wrote using dialect was a poem called Birmingham Roller. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, like, I wonder if it's possible. I wonder if you can do it, if you can bring together this sort of delicate lyric poetry with this quite sort of guttural, unexpected vernacular language. Can you make that beautiful? And then it became a real mission for me to hold on to these beautiful words and to pass them on. And you mentioned something so helpful, Robin, in thinking about it, that often you can work out the word, or I'll just give you the word, like I often gloss the poems, or there's a sort of little glossary at the bottom. And I know for every writer it's different, but for me, I feel like I want to let people into the poem and into the words and say, look at this beautiful word for bits and bobs, or, this gorgeous word for death. I want people to be able to enjoy that language, not feel shut out by it.
Yeah, no, there are some lovely words, and I love the way that wench comes up such a lot. There's lots of words like that aren't necessarily dialect. Anyone can understand the word wench, but in such a setting that it just gives it a different feel. And also, you say guttural, but I mean, when you're speaking, it doesn't sound guttural.
I think it's something about getting the balance right as well. And if I ever work with other writers who are writing in vernacular or dialect, you're getting that balance right between giving the reader a sense of the voice and the place and not driving them absolutely crackers. Because that is a real danger as well. Like, if you go too deep into the vernacular, it's too hard for people to access. And when I was writing The Home Child, I knew I needed to use enough of sort of the vernacular of the Edwardian Black Country to make the main character Eliza feel like a real little girl from that time, but also not so much that it got in the way of readers enjoying the story.
Which segues very nicely into talking about The Home Child. Now, a couple of things. It's inspired by a real story, isn't it? Is this your great aunt? Mm-hmm. And just tell us a tiny bit about the background, the sort of shocking background to this.
So The Home Child is a novel in verse, a story told through poems that reimagines the life of my great aunt, Eliza Showell, who was one of the British Home Children. And the British Home Children were the 100,000 plus poor and orphaned children who were sent out to Canada to work as indentured servants, as farm labourers and domestic servants. This process of what I think of as forced migration went on between the 1860s and the 1960s. So The Home Child, the book, follows Eliza's journey from being an orphan in the Black Country all the way out to Nova Scotia in Canada, where she settled.
It's a shocking story, and it's so poignant. You call it a novel in verse. So I was interested at that, a novel in verse, not a verse novel. What aspects of it would you say make it a novel? Is it simply that it's a story?
I'd love to feel that people could read the book in the same pleasurable way that you read a novel, that you follow a story from beginning to end, that actually it's made of individual discrete poems that work by themselves, but that anyone, a poetry lover or not, could pick up the book and enjoy the story, enjoy the narrative. When I first started writing about Eliza's story, I don't think I knew what it was going to be, Robin. It just felt like a big unwieldy beast. But the story really haunted me, and so I kept on writing. And I think I had this really profound sense that I didn't just want it to be a sad story about something sad that happened. I wanted to, I suppose, bring life and joy and light into that story as well, of not only a sad thing that happened to a girl, but what it's like to be a girl when you're 12, sort of flung out into the world.
Yeah. There were lots of aspects to the book which I felt gave it a novelistic feel. For example, it's kind of structured in chapters, isn't it? So we've got the two central chapters where Eliza is in Canada, but the first chapter is we meet her before she becomes an orphan, and then it's her journey across. And it felt like there were kind of cliffhangers at the end of each chapter, much like in a novel, like, oh, what happens next?
Good.
And then there are these beautiful illustrations. Now, I've been known to give short shrift to illustrations in poetry books, but actually I thought it worked really well. So you've got these little, a page between the chapters, and it's some character from a poem that's either just been or that's about to come. So you've got a pair of birds, or you've got a moth. And so it's just another way of pulling, I think, the reader into the story.
It's been like an absolute joy to me, Robin. I've never had a book with illustrations in before. But they commissioned a wonderful Somerset lino print artist called Gemma Trickey, originally to do the cover. But as we decided we wanted to break the book up into segments, then we asked Gemma to create some little images to go between. So I'd not thought of them like chapter markers before, but that's a really beautiful way of thinking of it. They sort of hold you for a second and then release the flow again, don't they?
Yeah, totally. No, I thought it was beautiful. And I think it's the final one, a pear. And you are taken back to the reference earlier on. And it is lovely. Very clever, I think, the form. So obviously, we don't want to give away too many spoilers about what exactly happens. But maybe we could start with you reading one of the poems where we meet Eliza. And I rather liked this one called Fiery Holes.
So this name, Fiery Holes, was the name of a real place in Bilston in the Black Country. And apparently it's because there used to be holes in the ground where just jets of steam and fire would occasionally shoot up.
Nothing like the graphic description of a place, is there?
Seems truly biblical, doesn't it? So in this poem, we get one of our first peeps at Eliza and her mum in their little back-to-back house. Fiery Holes, Bilston, June 1907. Come by night, when spirits fly from the flames of the furnaces. By night, barely darker than day, when the earth spews sulphur, pounding and hammering, men stumbling down its deepest seams, a smutter of lamps, the drunken air. Take the form of a moth, on shivering wings take the wind, swift, to the court on Silver Street. The passage, brewers, stink of the miskin, a window pane cracked, laundry hung across each inch of the kitchen. Here is the place. Damp walls, snuffed candle. A child and a mother sweat beneath a blanket, thin as vixens, both their hands raw from washing. Eliza, the little stubborn one, is dreaming. See the freckles twitch, see the dark of her lashes. She dreams of horses. The mare that drives the soil cart through the reesty dark, its silvery shoes agleam in the muck, the star on its brow. She's in love with its prancing. Curled against her mother's wheezing back, she digs her heels and dreams she's riding, bareback, across the Liso, beyond the town's rough hems, her brothers, the steelworks, the sweltering chapel, that terrible hovering rook of the workhouse, dreaming, the air blown spotless. All the blackened sparrows lift their voices.
Thank you. And it ends with one of those long M dashes, Emily Dickinson style, doesn't it? To kind of project us forward. It's a cinematic sweep right from the sparks against the night sky down into the courtyard, into the home, into the bed. There's Eliza and her mother, and then into her mind. It's brilliant. You know, what she's thinking about, and you can almost sort of feel her breathing at that point. I noticed that you take different points of view throughout the book. So this is the outsider taking a look. And then we have various document type poems where people report on her when she's taken into care. And I got the feeling that as we're reading these descriptions of her, that we as the readers are kind of colluding in this. We're kind of making these evaluations whether we want to or not, as if we're part of it, which I thought was very clever. Other times it felt like a Greek chorus making a comment on a tragedy as it unfolds. In the middle of this, we have Eliza's voice. So one of the poems where we get to hear what Eliza's thinking is when she's put on the boat and is being sent across the Atlantic. Perhaps we could hear that one. Sailing Day, Liverpool, please.
Sailing Day, Liverpool. The gulls are crying like little wenches. Goodbye, goodbye, good luck, goodbye. Roar and squally. The wind moithers as we climb the steps. Birdie legs are shivering our itchy new stockings. Nellie, Margaret, Kathleen, Dora, Higgins, Cheryl, Elwell, Proctor, age 6, 9, 4, 11. White hankies whip from our waving ons, quick as birds, flying up, up, whim off. Only Dora Pike blarting. Agnes, Eliza, Peg, Hilda, Bib, Gell, Hodgetts, Munden, age 3, 5, 12, 7. The rest of us ghosty-faced, so quiet. You can hear our bellies jimmick as the waves rock the ship. Goodbye, goodbye, good luck, goodbye. Watching Liverpool shrink to a doll's town in the fog, already wiping out the sight of us. Doris, Rose, Ida, Clara, Dakin, Tompkins, Pike, Bunda. Was herded like cows down endless wet steps, squeezing the end of the wench in front. Goodbye, goodbye, good riddance, goodbye.
Oh, squeezing the hand of the wench in front.
No. When I was doing the research, Robin, bits of the research were just so overwhelmingly sad. I think when I was writing this book, obviously my own boys were really similar age to lots of the home children.
Yeah.
And there were parts of it that were just so moving. I think thinking about the vulnerability of the children.
Yeah, just extraordinary. And then you've listed these names, and again, it's a list, isn't it? How they were, that's how they were. They were just considered to be a list of names and ages, and off they went. Only Dora Pike blarting. Now, blarting means crying, doesn't it? That comes up again. I thought that was a lovely word. So Eliza is resettled on a farm, isn't she? And she's kind of put to work. And I get the impression that she wasn't ill-treated, but she was certainly overworked, like a slave, virtually. In your imagination of the story, she still thinks for a while that she's going to go home, but then that kind of dissipates, I think.
When I was researching the book and just read hundreds of accounts, first-hand accounts and interviews with home children, two things really moved me that they spoke of. The first is how many of them imagined that they would be able to go home. Often they ran away. They were sent to really rural placements as it lessened the chance of them trying to run away. And lots of them held this dream of home, or having a home, even right on into old age, of going back to England or perhaps being reunited with family members. And something else that moved me so much was that when the children spoke about their lives as young emigrants, they spoke time and time again of being made to feel like animals in their lives as young emigrants. So I've tried to weave that throughout the poems, this taking away of their names, of their identity as being put to work like animals. But also I've tried to bring in alongside that this redemptive idea that perhaps animals might be the best and noblest of us, the gentlest of us, that to be an animal or a creature places us in the family of flowers and plants and non-human things.
I was seeing the interchangeability of humans and animals in more that redemptive sense, in more that kind of beautiful sense of being part of nature. But I can see how that works both ways. Now, one of the characteristics of this countryside that she's sent to is it's near a marble quarry. So there's the whiteness of the quarry or the stone, and also snow comes up again and again. Clearly a cold, snowy landscape, and so unlike where she's come from. So we've got this contrast of the black and the white, and in this sense, the black is the good, symbolises the good. So perhaps you might read Snow Globe, which is one of these looking in on Eliza's world from the outside.
So in this poem, Snow Globe, it allows us to step back and have a look at Eliza in that first snowy winter. As you say, Robin, that it feels there's a real contrast between sort of the black and the fiery holes of the Black Country, and then this snowy, lonely landscape. Snow Globe. Imagine her in the snow globe of the first winter, when the snow falls for months, when the wind is a coyote at the barn doors and the Scotch pines are furred like great bears. The water in the trough is ice, the little speckle-bellied fish motionless in the stream, and the only sounds in the muffled woods are of snow falling. But that is no sound at all. And Eliza's breath on the wet wool of her collar, and that too is no sound at all. The whiteness changes everything. Everything is wiped away. The back roads, the churches, the dead returning to Loam in the Malaga Watch cemetery. Even the lake itself has been drunk by whiteness. Only she has colour. That sorrel hair, like a bird from the old country. Shake the glass globe and watch her in miniature, cradling a piglet, mucking out in the syrupy light of the late sun, or curled on her side on a narrow cot, eyes open, mouth ajar, watching her breath freeze in the air. No matter how we shake, the snow will still fall. The foals suck milk from her fingers in the stable. The violets lift their trembling shoots from the earth. The snow falls. It is happening still. The snow falls as if it will never stop falling. Somewhere we choose not to look. Look. She is crying. Now shake again and her tears melt like snowflakes on her cheeks.
It's a lovely premise, the snow globe, and you shake it at the end and you get a different picture. Again, you're being invited to do this as the omniscient, godlike watcher on the scene. It's very powerful and beautiful. And also two things that come in at the end of that poem, the violets, which it sounds like violence because it's violets, as in beautiful flowers. Violets come up quite a few times through the book, I notice. And the other word is the foal. Now, here we have that black horse that I talked about earlier. This black foal is a character that Eliza befriends very early on in the story. It's her sort of one friend, really, until another appears. And I just think the way the foal is portrayed is so beautiful. And then it gets its own poem. Is it about the foal or is it about Eliza? That's the question.
I was so interested that you'd picked up on this idea of the black horse, as I'd not ever thought of that before. But when I started thinking about Black Country, and actually again in the Republic of Motherhood and now the Home Child, in all of the books there's this motif of black horses, black foals. I love horses, and it reminded me, there's this really beautiful sculpture along the railway line in the Black Country, which is of some black horses, some metal black horses in motion.
Oh, really?
Running along. I've written about these horses. They always sort of feel sort of benevolent, goddess-like little creatures. So in this poem, The Foal, we meet Eliza and also the other home child who is taken on by the MacPhails, a boy, Daniel. And this is when the two are becoming sweethearts. Foal. For 147 days, no one touched her. No one brushed her hair. No one rocked her or soothed her. No one rubbed balsam into her back when the cough rattled her lungs. No one caught her arm to halt her as she skittered from the barns. No one took her hand, traced her name and a heart on the sapling of her spine. No one, until he came, through the meadowy dusk where she crouched in the stable, lifting a bridle, her sorrel head bowed, her teeth clacking, as he knelt before her and touched his fingers to her mane.
Oh, it's just so lovely. The foal becomes Eliza, and he has this effect on her, which was the effect the foal had on her when she arrived, and it's just so beautiful. I won't talk any more about the plot of what happens at the end, but it does do what you said you wanted it to do. I think creates this novelistic feel that you want to read all through. You start at the beginning and you read through. I think it's a lovely, lovely book, and I hope it does really well. I'm sure it will. The Home Child. Congratulations.
Thanks, Robin. I think as I mentioned before, I wanted it to be a pleasure to read. The way I love to read novels as well as poems, and it feels like a pleasure to immerse yourself in a story.
Yeah.
And I wanted The Home Child to feel like that too. A sad story, but a really tender story. And also a story about love and resilience. So moved thinking about the home children, about all children sort of migrate and leave behind their homes. How they manage to thrive and fall in love and have families.
Yeah.
It's a constant source of wonder to me.
One certainly left with a sense of fantastic hope at the end. Yes, a sad story, but as you say, resilience and love. No, I thought it was beautiful. So is there anything you're working on? You must be working on something new now, or?
Well, whenever I've finished a book, I always have a really long, quiet period in which I don't really write anything.
Ah, that's interesting, yeah.
But what was immensely helpful to me was the other week I put a call out on Twitter saying I'd like to start writing again after a quiet period. What do other writers do? And just received an absolute treasure trove of responses, activities, gentle writing techniques, bits of inspiration. And I can send you the link for that because I think for any writer, it just feels like a gift of lots of ways back in when you've had a little break.
Twitter can be good for that, can't it?
Amazing hive mind, all the writers in the world.
So thank you, Liz. It's been absolutely brilliant. Really lovely that you shared that work, your new work, The Home Child, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Robin. It was so nice to chat with you.
What a gorgeous imagination Liz Berry has. I think she's one of those poets that is a world builder because she's got her own language and bits that she's salvaged from the way Midlands people talk. And she's created an imaginative world that's she's making almost her own mythologies about the Midlands, spoken in her own language. And it's almost like, some of it's kind of fairy tale-ish.
Yes, she said that, didn't she? She said that she's kind of created her own stories or ballads or myths and is so credible and feels authentic. But I liked That word you just used, salvage. Yeah, she has salvaged a lot.
Yeah. Her things about a poet can make things up. I love that because she's used all this raw material, makes you think of all the industrial bits and pieces left in the Midlands and kind of refashion them into this semi-mythical world of her own invention. But that resonates and echoes with the sort of black country we've been through on trains and stuff. I used to live in the West Midlands, so I kind of
right.
I know the sorts of things she's talking about. That there's abandoned industrial lots and so on being reclaimed by nature. It's lovely.
I like that idea of the black horse. So there is an actual black horse that you can see from the road.
The Year We Married Birds, I just absolutely adored that poem. And sort of the fact that she married a kingfisher and this idea of, at the end, all the brides ascending into the trees.
Yeah, beautiful.
That's just so strongly full of imagination and like this fairy tale quality.
Yes, and do you think I felt also it's kind of borne out by her voice as well? Just listening to her, she has this lovely sound of someone telling you an old story. It might be a fairy tale, it might be a true story, but somehow it kind of lulls you. It's just a gorgeous voice to listen to.
Yeah, she's in danger of giving those Midlands accents a good name, really.
She's a poster girl for the black country accent.
One of the things when I was listening to the interview that, especially when you're talking about the home child, telling that story, it sort of made me think of Dylan Thomas a bit, like in Under Milk Wood, where he creates a kind of imaginary Wales and
yes,
the language of it, that you can hear the way Welsh people use English in it.
And also that she uses the talk of different groups of people, the children's chatter or the repetition of what they're taught in church, and the commentary. There's this kind of Greek chorus-like commentary on what's going on in the background.
Yeah, that idea of not for 147 days, no one touched her. That poem, Foal, I think.
Oh
it was.
gosh, the one about the passage to Liverpool, and she lists the names of these little girls and their ages.
Yeah, the gulls am crying like little wenches. The gulls are doing their crying for them.
There's a little poem that Liz didn't read, but there's a very short poem called Marble Mountain, and this dialect word, wum, I guess that's how you pronounce it, W-U-M, which according to the glossary means home, but it comes up quite a lot. But this little poem, Marble Mountain, twin churches perched on the roadside like two white doves, eyes shut and beaks to the sun. Where were you brought from, lassie? I says, wum.
Oh God.
It's just like, where are you from? Home. This poor little thing. You're right. She's invented this whole landscape in a way. It imagined this whole landscape and the contrast of the landscape of home and then the landscape over in Canada. It was very clever. She's taken a story and just embellished it and gone deep into it in a really moving way, and in a way that you really feel a connection with these girls.
Were they sent? I didn't quite catch whether they were sent over because of the war, the Second World War, was it?
No, it went on for longer than that. It was a government scheme to rehome orphans or children who were basically considered at risk or whatever. Between 1860 and 1960, over 100,000 of Britain's poorest and most vulnerable children emigrated to Canada to work as indentured farm labourers and domestic servants.
Oh, God.
It says that in the introduction. So they were just, yeah.
It's recently.
In the book, one poem is a little letter from Eliza's older brother, saying, dear sirs, I understand you took my sister in care because I couldn't look after her, but now I'm older and I can look after her. Can she come back?
Yeah.
She was long gone at that point. Yeah, it tells a story, but it is so beautifully written and gripping.
She wears her research lightly, doesn't she? I mean, it has that ring of truth, but
indeed,
you're not sort of exhausted by somebody parading all the all the reading they've done.
A 2-page introduction gives you enough of a background to know what is the truth behind the story, and then a glossary at the back for some of the words. And that's it. You don't need any more footnotes or anything. The story tells itself. It's very, very lucid, and it's fantastic.
I always find that people being sent away forever just absolutely heartbreaking. There's a scene in The Colour Purple, that movie, where 2 sisters are physically dragged apart, and it just makes me weep every time I've seen it. In the Channel Islands, a lot of children were sent to England just before the Germans invaded in 1940, and they didn't come back or see their home island for 5 or 6 years afterwards. And I've known people that did eventually return, but they just felt like strangers in their own homes. So it's that kind of forced childhood evacuation that's very traumatic. But to never come back.
I know, and it went on, didn't it, all over. Indigenous people in Australia were separated from their families, and it happened in Canada.
Yeah, but I think in the past people have been very cool-hearted about, what happens to children.
So that's The Home Child by Liz Berry, published by Chatto and Windus, and it's new out, last month. Marvellous book. Now, Peter, you and I have been out and about, haven't we?
Yeah.
In London at the National Poetry Competition Awards Night.
There's something about walking into a room full of poets that kind of, it's like, introducing 2 new cats into a kind of room full of cats. Everyone's eyeing each other dubiously. And then everyone has a glass of wine and begins getting on famously.
It's true.
So we were there to hear the readings from the winners of the National Poetry Competition. And we heard 10 readers, and 7 of them were commended poets. And then there was the first, second and third prizes. The judges, Jason Allen Paysant, Greta Stoddart and Michael Simmons Roberts, there was this figure bandied about of 18,000 entries. I don't think it ever really hit me before. Just if you're reading a third of that, you're going to be reading 6,000 poems.
I think Judith Palmer, the director of the Poetry Society, who introduced them, she did say, didn't she, that each of the 3 judges reads 2/3 of the entries. So they each read between 12 and 13,000.
Good grief.
And then, yes, so they don't all read all of them, but all the poems do get read by at least 2 of the judges.
Yeah.
And then presumably they have to whittle them down and then come together and discuss. Frightening, isn't it?
I think their 10 poems they chose were all, highly accomplished works in their own ways. To sort of go through the placings, in third prize was Freya Bantiff, and her poem's called God the Whale. It worked itself up into a beautiful kind of image of God as a whale, ghosting through all this kind of detritus of human existence. Yeah, so, very strong poem. And interestingly, about God, because a lot of times people flinch at the idea of writing about God, but she found a way of doing it that seemed kind of contemporary and yet no less profound, as it were. The second place poem by Tife Kusuro is called The Only Other Dark-Skinned Girl, and it's about a dark-skinned girl looking at another dark-skinned girl, watching another girl in her class. And she's eating her scabs and picking bits of stuff off her body. She'd peel a piece of land off her elbow, stare at it for a while like a cartographer, like God on the 6th day, looking at what she had made. Something really unusual about it.
Yes, it ends with that line. The girl said, "In my house, I wrote a proverb. The safest place for you is inside your stomach." So is this kind of, where is a safe place?
Yeah.
As you say, it's an unusual poem, and it feels very raw, powerful. And it was interesting because we both spoke to her afterwards, didn't we? And this was basically her first not her first poem ever, but first time she'd really entered a competition and decided she was going to write, seriously as a poet. So
Yeah.
it is weird because now looking at the booklet of the prize-winning poems, quite a few of these poems, reading them again and seeing them on the page, I'm more impressed with than I was on the night almost. And I would
agree.
say something about poems in competitions are going to be usually, not always, but they're usually quite long, aren't they? If you're given a 40-line limit, a lot of people will write up to the 40 lines. And they're quite often these one-off poems. I find them quite hard to take in at a reading, at first reading.
I warmed also to the winner, Lee Stockdale. One thing people have called out is that he's 70 years old. He's also from the US. But his poem, I found a bit prosaic when I heard it on the night, but the imagery is really strong. It's my dead father's general store in the middle of a desert. The poem talks about this general store that is run by his father, and he sort of arrives all at some point in his life all shattered, and he says, I crawled in on my hands and knees. He handed me an ice-cold orange nehi drink. It's pure coincidence that this store is my father's. I ask him where all this stuff comes from, as no trucks travel this road to replenish merchandise no one buys. He doesn't like questions that challenge his existence. I become quiet. He's cutting my hair and might consciously or unconsciously make me look bad. We learn at the end of the poem that this father died. In fact, he killed himself when Lee Stockdale was very young. It's just a kind of weird poem with its own atmosphere and place, and it's very unusual. On balance, I think it's a worthy winner, but these kind of things are always apples and oranges, aren't they?
Yeah, and it's always subjective, isn't it? I mean, I agree with you. I feel it is quite prosy.
Yeah.
In fact, I was looking at it thinking, what if we got rid of all these line breaks? Would anything be lost? And it didn't feel like it. The story is very American, isn't it? I sort of was thinking of, Harry Dean Stanton in some movie in the middle of nowhere.
Paris, Texas or something,
Yeah, exactly. It's got that atmosphere to it. And it's got a real kind of twist at the end. Suddenly we hear that he killed himself. So in a way, it is like a little flash fiction, I suppose.
Yeah.
What the hell do I know? But it's all subjective, isn't it? I mean,
It really is,
competition is judged blind.
Reading the sort of pamphlet of the 10 winning poems, I can't say I was that overwhelmed. This was not the grooviest collection of poems I've ever seen by any means, for my tastes anyway. But
well, that's another thing, though, isn't it? It's not a collection. They're put together as a collection for this lovely booklet, which is great.
Yeah.
But it's not a collection, and that does show, of course. You go from one poem to another, it can be a bit of a jar.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. So, what about you, Robin?
I just picked up again off my bookshelf a collection of essays by Katie Evans Bush called Forgive the Language, Essays on Poets and Poetry. And it was published in 2015 by Penned in the Margins. And I've dipped in and out of this several times, and I just reread the first essay and was reminded it's got so many good points in here. Katie, she's a powerhouse of knowledge and got a real academic head on her and has always got something interesting to say. But so the first one, it's titled The Poem is a Question, Keats, Negative Capability and Us. Now, of course, negative capability did come up once before, and I think it ended up in the bloopers because we couldn't think of anything to say about it. But this was a really fine essay, which she makes so many good points. So she starts by, rather than launching into Keats, she starts by talking about these two famous bits of advice that are given to poets when they start writing, which is write what you know. Actually, I think that's given to all writers. Write what you know, and show, don't tell.
Yeah,
and
thanks to
she
Ian
really
Foster.
All right. Well, she kind of jumps in on this and says, hang on, write what you know, but how do you even know what you know, first of all? And then show, don't tell. She said, presumably that applies after the writer has figured out what they do and don't know. So once you've figured it out and you know what you're writing about, show, don't tell works, except when it doesn't. And so she sort of says, yes, of course, it's from Ezra Pound, isn't it? Go in fear of abstractions, use concrete images. But her advice is actually write what you don't know. And number 2, ask, don't tell.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So to do that, she then says, let's think about this thing about negative capability, which Keats only ever said once in a letter. He never mentioned it again. And yet, like she points out, people have written whole theses on this one phrase about what he meant. So her take on it is that the problem is sort of in the words. You see, negative sounds negative. It's not negative. It's about potential. And she gives a couple of examples of, first of all, a photographic negative. So a photographic negative contains all the information necessary for the picture, but it doesn't yet present it. I enjoyed that, thinking about that one. And also negative space.
Yeah.
So the idea of negative space around an object in an image or whatever, it's the stuff around that often you're not looking at. So what she's saying is if you're telling about something or showing something, you're actually missing out a lot of the information because you're missing out the negative space around that thing. And she also talks about the word capability can be confusing. She says, why not think of it as capacity? So the capacity for effacing our own observing, classifying, self-oriented ego and being open to frequencies that we may not understand.
Yeah.
So she feels that if you're open to the negative space around a subject and prepared to clear that space, then it's more like asking than telling. And then she goes on to talk about getting into this state of very active, imaginative observation. And if you imagine that creating your poem is you start with this like a photographic negative, and slowly the image presents itself, and that's when the poet needs to be able to jump in and kind of realise what's in the negative space. Creativity is a process of subtraction. I like that as well. She ends the essay by bringing up Elizabeth Bishop's poem Cirque d'Hiver, which is, I haven't got it in front of me, but it's the one about she's observing a little horse, a little rider on a horse, a little mechanical toy. And she uses that as an example and works through it and says, it's possible that when it gets to the end, it's possible that Bishop didn't even see where it was going until the end. She was allowing the picture to present itself and then was open to the negative space that it presented around the subject.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think one of the other things about negative capability is that kind of happiness with the idea of ambiguity and kind of that sort of venturing off into somewhere that's unresolved and kind of unverifiable.
Yeah.
And finding that, that poets have access to a different kind of truth than other people.
Yes, and I suppose that ties in with the idea of don't write what you know, write what you don't know, be open to what you don't know, and then see what actually arises from that.
It's not showing and telling, it's about asking the questions.
Yeah. And being open to what you don't know about something. If you think you know what you're writing about, then you're closing yourself off to possibly the real subject.
Yeah.
The whole point being, she says as well, I've skipped through this, I've just read a few bits, but she says there is a big arrow pointing us towards what needs to be contained or encompassed within a poem, and that is that which will help the reader feel emotional truth. So that's her sort of what she feels the poet is aiming towards. Yeah.
Going back to Liz Berry, the extensive research that she did, she had plenty of facts at her fingertips, but they were springboards into something else, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Robin, that negative capability malarkey, have we nailed it yet?
I think we did better than our last attempt.
I think we probably need to revisit it one day.